Our next guest has been working with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin to try and get some relief to businesses and to consumers who have been hit so hard by the coronavirus to this point. Joining us right now is Senator Marco Rubio. He is the chairman of the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And Senator, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You know, we were just listening to all the moves that the Fed and the Treasury have taken so far to try and make sure that they help Wall Street. And I understand the reason they need to do that is to make sure that the banks can still act as a conduit to get to small businesses. But small businesses have been hit incredibly hard by this. People who are working for those businesses already getting laid off in droves. What needs to happen right now?
Well, we need to act quickly in that regard, you know, and I think we need to start thinking about not just small business, obviously, but the people who work for them, okay? And so our biggest concern is that we are going to be separating people from employment. So think about it this way. Somebody owns a dry cleaning operation. They have 5 employees who know how to operate those machines. This person, they're going to see a dramatic reduction in clients and customers coming in. And so now they're forced to lay off the 5 people. So now those 5 people are forced to go home, and not only are they locked up at home, and even if they're collecting unemployment or what have you, they now have a second fear, and that is there a job for me when I come back? And the small business has also some concerns about, okay, so when this ends and I restart, are those employees still going to be there? And if they're not, by the time I find new people and train them, it'll take me another month to be operating or longer, and I can't survive it. So we are trying to figure out what is the most effective way to get cash into the hands of small businesses so that they can maintain payroll for at least a 6-week period and not have to disconnect from these employees. And there is an existing program. There's an existing program, the 7A program. It wouldn't necessarily be that program per se, but we would ideally, at least in my mind, we would use these over 800 lenders across the country, including all the big banks plus, you know, hundreds of small community banks and credit unions and so forth to deliver what would be initially considered a loan, but that up to the full amount of the payroll. And if in fact it is used for payroll, that loan would then be forgiven, and whatever portion of it above that they used for some other purpose can either be returned or would then convert a year from now into a loan. But the bulk of it, of course, would be, if not all of it, would be used for payroll for 6 weeks.
That's huge what you just said, because I've been trying to figure out how a small business operator would do that. You want to take out a loan, perhaps. You want to pay your employees, but you're never going to get back the sales that you lost over that period of time. If you're a dry cleaner, if you're a restaurant, if you provide any sort of service, those sales are just gone. So your idea is to make sure that that gets to them and is then eventually forgiven for anything they were using to keep their payroll, to keep their employees on the payroll.
Right. So the way to think about it is, if your payroll for 6 weeks is $10,000 or $15,000, and you borrow $15,000, and obviously at the end of all this, we'll be able to see from your filings whether you maintained your payroll with the same number and the same figures and so forth. That entire $15,000 would then convert into a grant, basically. Now, if you use $10,000 of it for payroll, and the other 5 you used for some other, whatever it may be that you want to do that's outside of overhead, then a year from now, because there wouldn't be any payments no matter what for a year from now, that would become a traditional small business loan. And of course, the government, Treasury, would guarantee this 100%. But what I like about the proposal, too, is that it isn't a government interaction. We would be relying on our existing network of preferred lenders under this SBA program, and there's over 800 of them across the country. I mean, I'm not branches, 800 individual lenders, including all the big banks, but also scores of community banks and credit unions.
Well, it is a big government program to the extent that it would be federal dollars that would then turn into the grants. Correct? These banks would not be on the hook to go ahead and forgive the loans.
Yeah, the alternative is to send everybody, money through the unemployment system, but now you're disconnecting them from employment. Right. And I think the last thing we need here is to be disconnecting people from the security of knowing they have a job to go back to, even when this ends. So people are already facing extraordinary uncertainty, and they're already going to be, inconvenienced and in many ways traumatized in some cases by weeks of not being able to do certain things. And then on top of that, we don't want to add the worry that, well, there's no job. By the way, there's no guarantee you have a job to go back to. And just think of the startup costs and impediments for a business who, okay, we tell them they can reopen, but now they got to scramble to either find the people that used to work for them or hire new people and train them. And in some cases, that alone which would be impossible for them to do after going 6 weeks without sales.
You know, I love your plan, but I think it needs to go hand in hand with a program that does extend and boost unemployment benefits for the people whose employers don't take up on those loans or can't qualify for them or don't get access to them. I spoke with a number of people yesterday just talking about one accountant who I spoke with said he has 20 clients, maybe more, who have had to lay off 50% or all of their staff since Monday. And these are talking about moving companies, about caterers, about lawn service and tree companies, tree service companies that go out there. Those employers are already going without paychecks at this point, and there's no guarantee that the small business will immediately hire them all back. There's a restaurateur who we're hoping to get on the show tomorrow in Ohio who on Monday laid off 4,000 employees. He says he needs money from the government to get back up and running, and even if he does, it will still take him 4 weeks before his restaurants are open again. A lot of those employees won't be brought back until the last 2 weeks before that time.
Yeah, so obviously there are people that have already made a decision because the uncertainty. This program is a proposal; it's not in place, which is the urgency behind it. People are making decisions right this very morning about what they're going to do with their staff. And some maybe had 2 or 3 weeks that they could burn through some cash and keep them on hand, but ultimately won't be able to do it. So there are people that are going to be. This is not going to solve every problem. There are people out there that are going to be left without employment, and obviously there is proposals being worked on to address them. The one I've been focused on is how can we keep as many small businesses viable and connected to their employees for as long as possible so we don't create an additional disruption. And I think it bears saying in all of this, we are not talking here about some systemic failure of the system. We're not talking here about companies that did something wrong and now are asking the taxpayer to bail them out. What we're basically talking about is government edicts, basically a government requirement prohibiting private industry from operating. And so because of a public health emergency, and there is no other alternative. I am not in favor of these programs as a permanent feature of our public policy, but there is no alternative at this moment to inject cash into our economy than the government, because you have prohibited the private sector from operating in various important sectors.
That feeling, that sentiment you just mentioned, just feeling the sense of urgency, do you get the sense that that is universal among the other 99 senators that you serve with in Congress?
No, I think it's widespread. I wouldn't call it universal. I still think there are people that sort of have not come to the realization that we are not dealing with an extraordinary circumstance. I think there are still people that don't realize that we are uncharted territory, that there is no playbook for this sort of thing that we're confronting. I mean, the closest thing to it would be mobilizing a country after World War II as an example. I know that analogy has already been used by others, but there is no playbook for this. But this is an extraordinary world-altering moment that we're living through. I think there are two things that are certain. Number one is we are going to continue to experience even unforeseen and unexpected impacts of all of this in the days and weeks to come. And number two is that we will not emerge as a country or a world the same after this. There will be changes that will happen systemically. I don't know what all of them will be, but this sort of event that impacts every inhabited continent, every advanced economy in this way is the kind of thing that become pivot points in history for better and for worse.
Senator Rubio, I want to thank you for your time today, and I do hope that your colleagues pick up your sense of urgency very quickly on this. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.